Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival. I'm Robin Nesbitt, and pleased to welcome you to Building a Mystery. We'd like to thank our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And thanks to our official bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured at the festival by going online to bookloft.com. And now I'm pleased to welcome our authors, which, why else would you be here, right? Exactly. All right, first up, we have Karina Bartow, whose featured book this year is Brother of Interest. She grew up and still lives in Northern Ohio. Though born with cerebral palsy, she's never allowed her disability to define her. Rather, she's used her experiences to breathe life into characters who have physical limitations, but like her, are determined not to let them stand in the way of the life they want. Welcome, Karina.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Sure. Next up, we have Connie Berry, whose featured book this year is The Art of Betrayal, who's also the author of the Kate Hamilton mystery set in the UK and featuring an American antique dealer with a gift of solving crimes. Like her protagonist, Connie was raised by antique dealers who installed in her a passion for history, fine art, and travel. In 2019, Connie won the IPPY Gold Medal for Mystery and was a finalist for the Agatha Award's Best Debut. Hi, Connie, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Next, we have TG, or Tina Wolff, whose featured book this year is Raising Stakes. She writes mysteries that play in the gray area between good and bad, right and wrong. She creates puzzles meant to be solved. Diverse characters mirror the complexities of real life and real people, balanced with healthy doses of entertainment. TG Wolff holds a master's degree in civil engineering and is a member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you, Robin. Happy to be here.
Finally, last but not least, with a great first name is Robin Yocum, whose featured book this year is The Sacrifice of Lester Yates, which was just named a finalist for the Dashiell Hammond Award, presented annually by the International Association of Crime Writers North America. So congrats.
Thank you.
He's also known for his fiction set in the Ohio River Valley. He's the author of 5 additional works of fiction and 2 works of nonfiction. He worked at the Columbus Dispatch for 11 years, including 6 years as the senior reporter on the investigative desk. Prior to joining the Dispatch, he was also the associate sports editor of the Martin Ferry, Ohio Times Leader and a reporter for the Lancaster, Ohio Eagle Gazette. Robin grew up in the Ohio River village of Brilliant, Ohio. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you very much. Welcome to be here. Good to be here.
Yeah, great. I'll just start off with some questions here, and we'll just kind of have this as a good conversation. So if you have your book with you, hold it up when you talk about it. But what is your latest book about? And I'll start with Karina, if you want to, if you've got yours ready to go.
Yeah. My book is Brother of Interest, and it's a sequel to my debut novel, Husband in Hiding. And it follows a death detective who has taken an extended maternity leave. She has a 1-year-old daughter, but when her brother ends up on the suspect list of an assault case, she had to kind of unofficially investigate whether he's really guilty or if he's innocent. And he doesn't make it any easier because he goes on the run. So she's juggling motherhood along with finding her brother and hopefully solving the case.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Connie, what's your latest book about? And do you have your book with you?
Actually, I think I'm mixed up a little bit because I'm going to be talking about the book that's coming out May 10th.
Okay, great.
And that is the Shadow of Memory, which is
awesome.
The 4th book in the Kate Hamilton mystery. Kate, as you mentioned, is an American antiques dealer. She has gotten herself connected to a small fictional village in Suffolk called Long Barston. And she is now back in Long Barston. She is contemplating a very murky future with Detective Inspector Tom Mallory. She is also helping her colleague, Ivor Tweedy, organize an upcoming auction in a seaside village on the Suffolk coast. Netherfield Sanatorium, an abandoned Victorian insane asylum, is being converted into luxury townhouses, and Kate and Ivor have been asked to auction off a fine collection of antiques, including a 15th century painting attributed to the Dutch master Jan van Eyck. But when retired criminal detective Will Parker is found dead, Kate discovers that the halls of the sanatorium housed much more than priceless art. Kate is shocked to learn that Will Parker was her very good friend Vivian Bunn's first boyfriend. They met in 1963 at one of the old seaside holiday camps when, along with 3 other teenagers, they explored an abandoned house where a doctor and his wife had been killed under bizarre circumstances. When a second member of that childhood gang dies unexpectedly, and then a third, it becomes clear that the teenagers discovered more in the house than they realized. What was the dark secret they unwittingly found, and can Kate find out what's going on before Vivian becomes the next victim?
Ooh, sounds good. Thank you. Tina, how about you? What's your latest work you want to talk about?
So my latest work is called Raising Stakes. It is the 3rd book in the Jesus de la Cruz case file, set in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. And this story is about that fine line between being an advocate for somebody and just taking it too far. So the book opens on the first day of summer, right in front of Burke Lakefront Airport, where Detective Jesus de la Cruz is investigating a hit and run that ended a young accountant's life. It's the classic story of everybody loved Colin, and yet there he is dead. And as the web pulls apart, it's very hard to talk about a mystery without giving away something that's going to enable somebody to game the solution.
Right.
My stories are all about being able to solve the puzzles. That is why I'm being so very careful. As the web becomes unraveled, you start to see how what one point of view can be a very good and wholesome and proactive thing, from somebody's point of view can be an obstacle that needs to be raised.
Interesting. Sounds good. And I don't blame you. You don't want to give too much away. As an avid mystery reader, I'm like, no, don't tell. I never read book cover or blurbs anymore because they always give things away. So, all right, Robin, what book are you sharing with us?
Okay,
What's
so
it about?
I'm out of breath now because I came unprepared. So while Connie was talking, I had to run to the basement to get a copy
All right.
of my book. So The Sacrifice of Lester Yates is a sequel to a book that came out in 2012 called Favorite Sons. And the protagonist is now the Attorney General. Hutch Van Buren is now the Attorney General. And actually, Favorite Sons, it's too much to get into right now, but it started out as a wrongful conviction book and then changed a little bit later. So this picks up the wrongful conviction where Hutch is now the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. There's a man on death row that's very close to his time for his execution. And Hutch starts having questions about whether or not he's the real killer. And things unfold from there.
Oh, cool. Great. Sounds good. Thank you. I have a quick follow-up for Connie. How did you decide to set your series in the UK as an American? I mean, was it like you wanted to be able to travel to write your books, or just kind of curious about that?
Yeah, I have always been an Anglophile. When I was a very young teenager, wandering the halls of my public library in Illinois, I discovered Agatha Christie and P.G. Wodehouse, and I opened those books up and started to read, and I had never read anything like that. I thought I had discovered them. I thought I was the only one who knew about them.
Right.
And I had never heard anybody talk like that. I had never heard humor as funny as Wodehouse, and I just absolutely fell in love. I also had Scottish grandparents, so that kind of helped get me started. And then when I was in college, I went to St. Clair's College, Oxford, and just fell under the spell of the British Isles. So when you write a book, you're going to spend a lot of time in that setting.
Right.
And so I decided to pick a setting that I really wanted to spend a lot of time in.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you. All right. My next question for the group is, what inspired you to write this book? And I'll go backwards this time. So I'll start with Robin. What inspired, obviously it ties into that other book we were talking about, but what's the inspiration for your work?
Well, and that was it. You know, when I was with the Dispatch, I did a story on a fellow on death row at Lucasville. And I toured the death house after the interview. And there was a panel with a red, a green, a white button. And on each execution day, 3 guards. It was volunteer duty, but extra pay. Each would take a button. And on the warden's signal, each one would push the button, but only one was hooked to the juice. And I always thought I would write a book about a guy who volunteered for that duty. I thought that would be interesting. I started to write that book, I said back in 2010 or 2011. I got sidetracked, saw the book went a totally different way. My character said, no, that's not what the story is going to be about. It's going to be about just something else. And so that was always in the back of my head. And I had gotten a lot of requests for a sequel to find out what happened to Hutch. Okay. So that was kind of the inspiration. That was always in the back of my head that I wanted to do that. This book took a totally different approach to my original idea, but it centers around a wrongful conviction with some political intrigue. So it was always there. It's been lingering for about 10 years, waiting for me to go back and write it.
Makes sense. Thank you. Tina, what was your inspiration for your latest work?
Do you remember that scandal not all too long ago where those parents paid different money to different colleges to get their kids into the elite one?
Yeah.
One, I think their daughter went in under the rowing club but never rowed or something like that.
Yeah.
So being a parent, I have 2 teenage boys. You know, from the time they're born, you want the best for your kids, right? And we have plenty of just videos showing people doing obnoxious things so that their kid can get forward. So that was the kernel. That was the you can understand it up to a point, and then there's a point it becomes unacceptable. It becomes unethical. Sometimes it becomes illegal, and in my case, it became murderous. So it was more taking that element of what really happened and using that magical question, what if, and just making it bigger and bigger until it turned into this mystery.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Cool. Connie, you kind of mentioned that you're an Anglophile, but what inspired you for this particular series that you just had another book in?
You know, it's so interesting. I'm interested to hear what everybody has to say, because you just never know where inspiration will come from. And in this book, The Shadow of Memory, 3 things kind of came together. And one was a 2002 NPR This American Life program with Ira Glass. It was about some teenage boys who one summer explored an abandoned house, and it was so mysterious to them. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that would be like going back in time. It'd be like a time capsule. It just kind of captured my imagination. And then I also was inspired by Bill Bryson's book, The Road to Little Dribbling. And he talked about working as a young man in a mental institution called Holloway Sanatorium that was later turned into very upscale housing and kind of a gated community, and how unusual that was. That got me going down the rabbit hole of research about Victorian mental institutions. And then the third piece of the puzzle was some reports about Sotheby's auction house, who sold a Franz Hals painting to an American dealer. Subsequently, using modern technology, it turned out to be a forged painting, a fake. And so all those 3 things kind of came together.
Cool. That's wow. That's cool. Yeah. Thank you. Karina, how about you? What inspires you to write the current book? And I know it ties into the first one. So what's your inspiration series?
Well, it's a lot like Robin. I didn't really have in mind writing a sequel when I wrote Husband in Hiding. we're kind of nervous actually because, there's a certain bias against sequels that they're never gonna be original. And so I didn't go into this thinking of it as a series. I did conclude husband and hiring, he come back home and all that. They had their baby. And then my writing coach actually said, you need to do a sequel. And then when you wrote, my publisher said the same thing. And so I started thinking, what didn't I cover about Minka's wife, the protagonist? And the whole I found was her brother, because he was adopted as a child, and that inspired her to be a detective when they got him back. But I never had him appear in Husband and Hiding. He was always just a mention, So I thought, how can I work in a relationship and also bring her back to police work? So that's kind of how everything got started, and it took off from there.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Listening to you talk about bringing him back to the detective, a question I have for the whole group or each one. I mean, I'll throw it out there, but I'll start with Karina, I guess. What makes you write in this particular genre? I mean, mysteries and crime and thrillers. So, Karina, why do you write in that genre?
Well, the first couple books I wrote were love stories because that's what I like to read and everything. And so after a couple I thought, I can't really go much. And you can only do so much in that genre, especially since it's oversaturated anyway. And so I enjoy watching the stories and reading them. And my mind likes to come up with all those twists and turns, and that's why I enjoy it.
Makes sense. Connie, how about you? Why the mystery genre?
I don't know. That's what I love to read. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you that, but I love to read British crime fiction. Right. And I that's pretty much all I read, and that's what I watch on television. And I just can't get enough of it. And so I'm really writing what I love to read myself.
Got it. Makes sense. Tina, how about you? Why this particular genre?
Same kind of story as Connie. I read fiction or crime fiction, mystery fiction. I love the puzzle part of it, and it entertains me. And when I started writing, I really didn't do it with any aspiration of being published. I did it to entertain myself. And, those types of stories just keep building and building until you get to the point where you can publish them. And I still write them. I mean, I think we all have had the experience of, writing on deadlines, and it gets to a point where it really feels like a job instead of the thing you like to do. And my husband will remind me, is like, well, you don't have to do this. So I'm like, but I love doing this. And as soon as I can relax and I can laugh and I can intrigue myself, I'm hoping I'm doing the same thing for the readers, that it's their escape and their fun too.
Right. That makes sense. Cool. Robin, how about you? Why this particular genre?
And I'm not sure I can give you a good answer. I'm not sure I know. Because a lot of my books, they're not so much whodunits. A lot of times we know who done it. It's now what are we going to do about it?
Right.
And I really like writing about that human condition in the gray area of life, where it's not all black, not all white. We're dealing in that middle. where we make decisions based on the circumstances. And I know we were just talking a minute ago about what would you do to protect your children. And you know, I kind of like to throw that out, because in Favorite Sons, we know who committed the crime, but we watch what families will do to protect their children. But you know, I do have a background in criminal reporting and in the courts, covering the cops. So I guess I probably gravitate a little bit that way. And there's nothing in the world or worse than murder. I probably, you know what I mean? And
Right.
so
Yeah.
by that, and even some of the other books that I've written, you know, they're sort of like mystery light.
Right.
You know, there's a murder, but you know, it may not be all encompassing as far as the book is concerned and the protagonist's mission.
That makes sense. Well, and I think, you know, thinking about different mystery readers, I mean, some readers are there for the puzzle, some are there for the why and the psychology, which is why, you know, there's a whole host of things out there. And obviously everybody's motivated to write, and different readers, you know, read for different reasons too. So that all makes sense. Starting with Robin, what's your writing process like? I know a lot of people that come to these panels and watch Ohioana panels are aspiring writers. So I always like to throw in writing and publishing questions. So what's your process like, Robin?
Yeah, and I am probably a bad one to give advice on that, because I don't have one. You know, I still have my PR marketing consulting business.
Yes.
So I and those dang clients, they get in the way of what I really want to do, which is writing. But I write whenever I get a couple of minutes. If I don't have to have 4 hours where I sit down and do it, but I tell people I write all the time. I've got a little book I carry with me. When I hear something, a good idea or a good name or something, I write it down. And when I'm traveling, I use my voice to text app on my phone all the time, capture ideas and email it back to myself. In fact, this book, I wrote the entire first draft on my phone.
Oh, wow.
Dictating it and then sending it back to myself, and I would edit it on the paper. So would I like to be able to get up every morning and spend 3 or 4 hours doing it? Yes. But I don't think that's a reality for beginning writers. They're trying to juggle a family and a job or both. So I just tell them, you know, be dedicated to it. And when I'm working on a book, I make sure that I write a minimum of 500 words a day. Even if they're not very good words, you know, if I get them on paper, I can edit them later, but I try to keep moving that ball down the field. Right.
Makes sense. I've heard a lot of people say nothing worse than staring at a blank piece of paper, but just get something on there so that you can go back and work on it. So makes sense. Tina, how about you? What's your process like in writing?
So mine's the same in that I have a day job that really dominates what I do between my, you know, waking and going back to sleep. But after that, I differ a little bit. So as you read, Robin, I'm a civil engineer. I think very much like an engineer. So my process, especially with mysteries, begins with the end, with identifying, you know, who the body is, who did it, and why they did it. I can't start a story without knowing those things. I know a lot of people, and I'm not a planner. I am a little bit more of a pantser, but it's never a surprise to me who did it, because that is my destination. I work hard to figure out who would be other viable suspects and why they would have wanted that person dead. And then kind of work backwards in a series of events until I understand the crime and who did it and why. And then I pick the path of the way I'm going to tell the story, because there's so many examples out there, right? You can you know, talk like you did, Robin, about a little bit more of the Columbo style where you know who did it and it's really about the chase. You can do it truly as a puzzle with, you know, there's the suspects locked in a room type thing. So the story can take a number of different styles of how I, you know, of knowing who did it. Then my process involves a lot of daydreaming. I'm not a person who sits down and thinks while I'm in keyboard. I tend to see the scenes play out in my imagination, and once they settle, then I write them. And so my time at the keyboard versus my time imagining is probably 20/80. I spent a lot of time imagining. And that way, when I sit down to write, I'm through the part of figuring it out. And now I'm describing to you what I see.
Got it. Interesting. Thank you. That makes sense. Connie, what's your process like?
Yeah, you know, if there are aspiring writers watching, I hope the one thing that they're getting is there is not one right way to do it, that everyone has their own way of working, their own personality, their own lives that they have to deal with, and you just have to find what works for you. But I am very unlike Robin in that I cannot write in little bits and pieces. I have to have a chunk of time because it takes me a while to get into my book again. So every time I sit down, and again, staring at that blank sheet of paper, and usually I have an idea in my head, like Tina, of what has to happen in that scene. But in order to get myself back in the book, I actually go back, and the first thing I do is revise whatever I've written the day before. And just kind of smooth it out or do whatever it needs to be done. And in that way, I'm like entering the world of the book again. And then from there, I find that I can push forward into the next scene. And I do tend to work in scenes. So some scenes are shorter than others. I don't actually have a word count. I mean, I would love to write 500 or 1,000 words a day. Some days I do, some days I don't. But I just think it's such a good idea to figure out how you work best. But the thing is that however you work best, you actually have to sit in the chair and write at some point. You know, you've got to get it done. So making yourself do it, I think, however it works for you.
Makes sense.
It happen.
Yeah. Karina, how about you? What's your process like?
Well, I'm kind of a mix of everyone. Like Tina said, I'm not a planner at all. I take it day by day, and I typically sit down for a couple hours if I can in the afternoon, because I think that's a lot of what you need to realize about yourself is what time of day is your creative best. So unless I'm under a deadline, I don't do much in the morning creatively. But I'm more over all day. And I just do it scene by scene, day by day. And sometimes I know where I'm going and sometimes I don't. So I can fix a lot of that in editing, of course. You know, maybe the part didn't turn out the way I thought it would. But yeah, I just take it one day at a time, one scene at a time.
Makes sense. Well, like Connie said, you know, everybody does it differently. And I think Stephen King, he has a great book on writing. And his comment was the same as Connie said. You just have to sit down and write, walking around talking about it, it's not going to get it done, right? So piggybacking on this, what advice do you have for beginning writers? Did you ever get a great piece of advice that you're like, okay, I'm passing this on to the next other people, or but yeah, a piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's out there toiling away, or even thinking about toiling away? Karina, what do you think? What advice would you give to beginning writers?
To me, a dear persistence. You did from the beginning when you start to when you're pursuing publishing. Just gotta be persistent because it takes a lot of commitment to keep going, and especially when you have so many rejections, you just gotta look at it as every rejection is one closer to the acceptance. Your key to writing is all I had to say.
That's great. Keep on trying. Connie, what about you? What's your piece of any advice you'd give to a beginning writer?
You know, my best piece of advice is take the time to learn craft. And I have a master's degree in English literature. I had done some academic writing, lots of nonfiction writing, lots and lots of editing. I'd read thousands and thousands of books, mostly British crime fiction, and I did not know how to do it. People, when they start, or maybe I should talk about myself, there are certain mistakes you make that you don't know. And take the time to educate yourself on what makes a good book. How do you tell a story? Do lots of reading, network with other writers, join an organization like Midwest Mystery Writers of America or Sisters in Crime or some other organization. Get feedback, but just be actively trying to improve your craft. And I think that for most people, your taste in reading is high, but when you begin, you're kind of down here and you're just kind of working your way up, and it's worth it to take the time. And the worst thing you can do is write something and then try to put it out there before you've even gotten feedback from someone else.
It makes sense. I know a lot of authors belong to writers groups, and so helping, kind of that hive mind piece, working on a piece together or whatever. So that makes sense. Tina, what about you? What kind of advice do you have for writers, aspiring writers?
Well, the sit down and do it is absolutely the fundamental part. But really, I want to build on what Connie said, because I was going in the same direction, that you wouldn't pick up a paintbrush after never painting before and expect to be able to paint the Mona Lisa.
Right.
This is an art. You do have to learn how to do it, and you have to find your passion for it. But taking what Connie said, you ended with this, and I'll just take it a little bit further. You have to put it out there. You have to be able to take criticism. And you have to do it thoughtfully, because there's no book that everybody's going to love. Tastes run too different, standards are too different. And so while you need to be able to hear feedback, you also need to be able to judge the credibility of that feedback and make a decision for yourself on if that's where your book belongs. If 1 out of 10 people says, well, Nancy should have blue eyes, you change that, make that one person happy, and the other 9 people are like, I can't get brown eyes. So you have to be able to find that balance and that confidence to stand behind your work, listen to what people say, decide whether is a valid criticism and that your story is more powerful for adapting to that, or whether it needs to stand just as you intended it.
Right. Makes sense. Good. Robin, how about you? What advice would you give to aspiring writers?
I keep this, that's the Stephen King book you were talking about. I keep it right on my shelf. Every aspiring writer should read that. But, I'm going to repeat Connie and Tina. I think there was a great line in a Leon Uris book, and I think it was Trinity, where the author is asked to speak at a writing conference, and he gets up and asks how many people here want to be writers. Of course, everyone in the audience raises their hand. He says, then why aren't you home writing? And he walks off the stage. And I believe that's true. I don't believe that being a beautiful writer is the skill. I know a lot of people who are tremendous writers don't have the discipline to sit down and finish a book. Right. So, park your rear end in the seat. And I always tell people, once you finish the first book, whether it's publishable or it's that good, you've now overcome the biggest hurdle, which is now you have the discipline to sit down and finish a book. And to me, that is the first skill you need. Right. Now you can start polishing you should be reading other books, not to steal the ideas, but to see how other people do it. I listened to a James Lee Burke book years ago, and when I got done with it, I thought, okay, that's how it's supposed to be done.
Mm.
And it was really inspirational for me to take my time, a little more of my time, be a little more disciplined, because I don't know if it was my years in the newspaper business or just the fact I'm inherently impatient. You know, I'd want to whip through one book and get to the next. And when I read that, I realized, you know, I'm not writing publishable material. I need to take my time, back up, reread it, and make sure that's the best chapter I can write, the best paragraph, the best sentence. And
Right.
that, I think, made the difference with me as a writer.
That makes sense. I've heard a lot of authors and writers talk about, you know, read, you know, so that you are, as you say, studying the craft. As a retired librarian, my little piece of advice is a book called The Writer's Market. I would always have people come in and say, hey, I want to get published. I want to get into the business. And The Writer's Market, in addition to the Stephen King book, great resources. My next question, kind of piggybacking off of this, is so why did you become a writer? Like, so listening to you, Connie, I also am a huge British crime fan. I watch a ton of crime, you know, shows, but I've never wanted to put pen to paper. I'm like, I don't feel like doing that. Maybe I don't have the discipline. Maybe that's, you know, what Robin's talking about. But for my certain questions out to you guys, why did you become a writer? And I'll start with you, Connie. Why did you decide?
You know, I think that being a published writer is one thing, but being a writer is something that is within you. And Tina's husband told her, you don't have to do this, but actually, if you are a writer, you do have to do it.
Right.
So I have always written from childhood, and I don't know that I've ever talked to a writer who has not been like that, has started writing. Just the fascination of putting words on the page and of seeing in your mind that scene play out and of creating a story. You know, even if I were never published again, I would be writing something. I would be writing, you know, articles, or I would be writing cookbooks, or, you know, not cookbooks. That was a terrible example, but I just think that people who are writers have to write. That's just within them, and you just can't deny it. Now, whether you become published or not, I think depends on how willing you are to put in the work, the discipline, to learn the craft, to finish that writing.
Right.
That's a different subject.
That's a good distinction between being a writer and a published writer. Tina, you had said earlier you just started writing to amuse yourself or entertain yourself. So, want to expand a little? Was that your motivation then to write, or you're like, well, I've got this thing written now, let's publish it?
No, I really had no aspiration to publish. You know, I didn't know I was a writer. I specifically went into engineering because there was no reading or writing. Little did I know that is totally wrong. You have to read and write a lot. But I was living in Cleveland and working for a client in Northern Kentucky. And so that's a 5-hour drive both ways. And so I started crafting these stories as truly a way to keep myself engaged. And then I would write them when I got to the hotel. And it truly became the thing that I did to entertain myself. And it was fun. It's fundamentally fun. It turns out that I get a thrill from putting things together, whether it is solving a puzzle, like physically a jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzles, you know, picture related things, mathematical things. For me, it's all about how things go together. And writing a full-length mystery is one of the most challenging puzzles I've ever done, because you have to do it over such a long period of time.
Right.
So yeah, I still do it for the fun.
Cool. That makes sense. Karina, how about you? Why did you become a writer?
Well, for one thing, when I was 9, my mom actually took me to our local library, and we met, and also we heard her speak. So that way it's so cool to me to be able to talk like this to other, younger authors or anyone, because hearing her passion did spark that in me. And from that day forward, I kept thinking about it and telling people that's what I wanted to do. But I didn't know if I could commit to it because it is a lot to undertake. And with my disability, I can only type with one hand. So it's like logistically even possible. So when I graduated, I had an idea for a story, and I did decide to try. And so I finished in about a year, and I thought, I guess I can do this. So first and foremost, you had to have that passion. And I never wanted to write a story just to write a story. I wanted to be passionate about it, so I'll keep doing it as long as I have that passion.
Makes sense. Robin, how about you? I know you started as a journalist, but then how did you flip to book writing? Or, is that all part and parcel about why you want to be a writer?
Well, I think it's all part of it. But it also goes back to the day the math teacher at my high school told me I was one of the 2 worst math students to ever graduate from that school. He said there were worse, but they never graduated. I was actually one of the 2 worst, so I figured accounting wasn't in my future. And when you're a reporter, and I wrote a couple, before I wrote the novels, I wrote a couple true crime books, fiction. But you're always writing about someone else's accomplishments as a reporter. If you're the crime reporter, I used to say deeds and misdeeds. I always wanted to start with a blank sheet of paper and create something that was uniquely mine, my ideas, my imagination. And it took me a while. I mean, I wrote a couple of real stinkers before I finally wrote one that was that got published. And I think it was just trial and error. I just always wanted to do that, intrigued by creating something uniquely mine. And I think that was the big driver.
Yeah, that and no math, huh?
that no math. That's why I have an agent.
Right.
Take care of the numbers.
There you go. As Connie mentioned, there's a difference between writing and being published. And so that's my next question. What has the publishing process been like for you? Some people, we've all read stories where people get found like lightning bolting out in the field, and other people, as Karina mentioned, rejection after rejection after rejection. So I'm just kind of curious what your publishing process has been like. And I'll start with Karina. What's it been like for you to get published?
Well, my first book was the hardest. I think that's pretty common. I contacted 120 people before I got one acceptance letter. But then with that particular book, it was really different because, like I said, my publisher suggested I write a sequel to Husband in Hiding. But unfortunately, a year or 2 later, he ended up restructuring the business and left me without a publisher. So I wasn't sure for years if this would ever even come out because it is part of the series. And but I kept working at it. I had one book come out in between the 2 a love story. But I just kept at it, and finally I found someone who were willing to work with me on it. You know, she didn't, my editor didn't accept me right away. But once I put in the time and did some major revisions, then she said she gave me the green light. So that's how it happened for me.
Persistence paid off, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah. Connie, what's your publisher? What was your publishing process, or is it like, I guess getting started, what was it like?
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of people, it took me 10 years. But unlike a lot of people, I did not have a lot of rejection letters. Not because my work was good, because it wasn't, but because I knew enough not to put it out there before it was ready. And I knew it was not ready. I knew it was not ready. And I kept thinking to myself, if somebody would just read this and tell me what's wrong, I will fix it and then I will go on. So I just kept trying to work with this thing. And I got advice, put that book aside, put it in the drawer, start something new. But I'm very stubborn and I liked that story. And that ended up to be my first book. So I just kept improving it, revising it. And eventually I took advice that I had heard more than once, 2-3 times, and I did a massive revision. I retired from my job, did a massive revision. I finished it in December of 2018, I believe. Went to a writer's now it must have been 2017. Went to a writer's conference in Florida in 2018, met my editor at my publisher. She read a little bit of what I had written and gave me a 2-book contract. So it was like a quick after 10 years.
Got it. Interesting. Tina, how about you? What's your publishing process been like?
Well, as I said before, I wrote with no intention of publishing.
Right.
A friend of mine had a call for stories, and she knew I had just finished one. And at this time, I think I had about 10 complete novels. Like, I never bothered going through all of the formal editing part because I didn't care. But she knew I had finished one, and so she encouraged me to submit it. And my current publisher, Down and Out, he read it. He read the submittal, asked me for the complete book, and he ended up publishing that one. I had sort of a sidebar before that because I did have a romance publisher picked up one of my series, and that was when I got the lesson in how to turn a mystery into a romantic suspense story into one suitable romance. That experience was good. It was a little bit rocky, and once I finished that contract, it was I couldn't figure out how to go forward with it. When it happened with Down and Out, it's been a very different experience. I'll call it a very professional one, in that it's used to the way I'm used to working with people, where it's based on relationships and instead of having individual submittals. So let's see, Raising Stakes is the 4th to come out with Down and Out, and I'll submit the draft for the 5th one here in about 3 weeks.
Oh, great, cool. Robin, how about you? What's the publishing process been like for you?
Well, I will tell you that once I found an agent, it got a lot easier. And I always make sure I tell aspiring writers, the one thing you need to remember is all you have to do is convince one person out there. Don't get overwhelmed by the rejection letters. You just have to convince one person that your book is worthy of being published, and then life gets a lot easier. The nonfiction, that wasn't difficult, but breaking into the fiction was. But once I found my agent in about 2007, in that range, things got a lot easier. Then I could focus on the writing, and she did all the heavy lifting for me.
Right. I have heard that before, that finding an agent, it does help a lot. So that, again, for aspiring writers out there, that might be something to think about and do some research on. We've talked a lot about being a good writer makes that you also should be reading. So I like to ask, what do you like to read? And I'm sure a lot of you probably do read crime fiction, but is there other things you read, and when you're writing, do you stay away from crime fiction so it doesn't ooze into what you're writing? So Robin, what kind of things do you read?
I am really eclectic. I like history. I like a lot of nonfiction. I like history. I was reading Bill O'Reilly's book on the surrender of Japan recently, which I thought was really well done. I do read a lot of James Lee Burke, and I will listen to his stuff over and over again just because. And I do a lot of audiobooks because I'm in the car so much.
Right.
And boy, I'm drawing a blank. I read The Pioneers by David McCullough, which was about the settling of Marietta, which was fascinating. So, I bounce around quite a bit.
Right. Makes sense. Tina, how about you? What kind of things do you read?
My reading ebb and flows with the writing. The more I write, the less I read. When I'm down cycle on writing, I'll read more. I cannot read mysteries when I'm trying to write them. I do end up picking styles. So I will tend to read romantic suspense. I do like the Victorian British set romance for as much as that's hard to admit out loud. But one thing I had been doing a lot of reading of, I do have a podcast called Mysteries to Die For, where I'm doing it. I just finished a season where we did adaptations of early mysteries. And so I was reading mysteries written. This was before mystery was a genre. So it started with Poe's Murder in the Rue Morgue and went up through I apologize because I can't remember the author's name all of a sudden. But the first Charlie Chan mystery. So from like 1820s American writing story set in Paris to 1920s set in Waikiki. And I've had a lot of fun reading some of these things and kind of having my mind blown that these were the first people who did it. Like some of these things like, oh, that's such a trope. It's like, wasn't when he did it. Wasn't when she did it. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's true. That's a good point. You think, oh, that's so overboard. And you're like, no, it was first. Yeah.
She was first. She was first.
Connie, I know you've mentioned British crime mysteries, but is there anything else you read or basically just that?
I read mostly that, but because I'm an English major and also English history major, I love history. I love to read the gold majors like Tina, the classics, not just Agatha Christie, but Dorothy Sayers and Niall Marsh and P.D. James and Cyril Hare and Wilkie Collins and all of those. So I try to read several of those during the course of the year. I also read the classics. I love Trollope. I love Jane Austen, of course. All of those writers, just love them. And then I do a lot of listening like Robin does on Audible because it's really hard for me now to take time to sit down and just do nothing else but read. I'm always trying to multitask. So while I'm doing boring things like cooking or cleaning or doing laundry or something, or driving in the car, I will turn on an Audible book. And if I really love a book, then I will actually buy it in a hard copy because I love to see how the words look on the page. So that's really interesting. So, history too. Love history, love police procedurals. And I'm in a book club. So every month during the school year, I read something that I would never read otherwise.
Right. Hence the book club. Yeah. Karina, how about you? What do you read?
Well, as I said before, I've always liked love stories. I enjoy Nicholas Sparks. But I enjoy mysteries too. The cozy genre. I like that, and something I read recently that I loved was a historical fiction novel called The Mystery of Mrs. Christie. and it's about the days when he went missing for 11 days. And there was another take on what might have happened. And I really loved it, so I would definitely recommend that.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Anything, any question I didn't ask that you'd like to answer, or any other advice for writers or out there that are watching this before we go? Okay. So thanks again to our panelists, Karina Bartow, Connie Berry, Tina Wolff, and Robin Yocum. And a reminder that you can get copies of all of the books by each of our authors from Book Loft at GermanVillage@bookloft.com. You can also find out their fuller bios and their other books they've worked on at the Ohioana site as well. Thanks again to our festival sponsors and partners, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Please check out the Ohioana website for all this year's festival programming, and everybody keep reading and writing. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Robin.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.